It is pretty challenging to come up here at the end of the day, at the end of 2 days, and talk about what you heard, because we can't prepare PowerPoints. I think I better begin my remarks by saying these are reflections of Mike Haskey and not official statements from the Bureau of Land Management or the Department of the Interior. I'd also like to say that if I was going to give an Oscar for the presentations I heard over the last couple days, I'd vote for Gordy Reeves for his most thought-provoking presentation about things we need to think about. We saw a lot of presentations that talked about, well, here's what the layout looked like, here's what the experimental design was, here's where we ran our transects. I want to talk to you a little bit about the experimental design I live my life in as the Deputy State Director. And it's not just science, it's social, it's legal, it's economic, it's political. So let me talk a little bit for just a couple minutes. And Klaus, I'm giving you the okay to boot me if I ramble on too long. Or at least give me the high sign, because I do have some key points. But I do want to talk about my experimental design. So legal, right now, the BLM has a management plan that was written in 2008. We've been litigated over it, but we have a court back in Washington, D.C. who said, BLM, that's the plan you're under, and it's different than the Northwest Forest Plan. That's one legal sideboard. Our other legal sideboard is just last week we got findings and recommendations of a magistrate judge here in Oregon that said, BLM, we're gonna recommend to the district court judge that you be put back under your 1994 plans and back under the Northwest Forest Plan. So we have two different courts kind of giving us different direction. George McFadden talked about the history of the O&C lands and the timber dominant kind of aspect that you often hear from us. We're being litigated over that once again back in D.C. about what does the O&C Act really mean. And there's case law out there as well that George mentioned about what the O&C Act means. So our legal picture is really kind of cloudy right now. Although I say that with great trepidation because both sides would say, what do you mean? You have courts telling you what your thing is. Social end of things. George talked about secure rural schools. It's sunsetting our last payment unless it's reauthorized. Will go out this year to the counties. We estimate from the BLM point of view, it's about $41 million. That's down from a historic high, or it wasn't a high average, but a historic high of about $115 million. That's a pretty big cut to the counties, and that economic hardship doesn't vary. I mean, it varies across the counties. It's much harder for some counties like Douglas or Curry or Josephine. It hardly impacts. It's hardly a blip for Multnomah County or Clackamas County. It hits the rural counties a lot harder. For Douglas County, that's 70% of their discretionary budget came from that money, came from either historically from O&C timber sale receipts or from secure rural schools. When they go back on receipts, if it's not authorized, I'm guessing all the O&C counties are going to get the split about somewhere between $10 and $12 million. A huge economic impact with a lot of social impacts. Economics, again, when we signed our controversial records of decision back in 2008, the whole economic climate was different. We were just starting to go into the downturn. But now, when we talk to our congressional folks, and when we get inquiries from Washington, D.C., it's, what about jobs? Where are the jobs? It's all about jobs. Of course, we in the agency who have lived this stuff know it's more than just jobs. It's environmental benefits, it's community stability. It is jobs, but it's more than just jobs. But jobs have really the specter of jobs have really increased the dialogue around BLM management. I don't know if Forest Service gets that as much. We got unemployment, that's greater than 10% in some of our rural counties. We've talked about thinning. Jerry mentioned all the thinning we did. Jeff Walters talked about all the thinning that the Region 6 has done in general, 97% of their program over the last few years. BLM's been pretty heavily invested in thinning, either for commodities or restoration. And we commonly get the question, how long can you thin? And I'm gonna use the answer that I heard today. Well, that's a complex answer, and it depends on the inputs. There's no easy answer for that. And then I want to talk just a little bit about some of the political forces that are particularly focused on BLM right now. Excuse me. We have one proposal out there that the BLM lands will be turned over to a board of directors, and they'll make decisions about how we manage the lands. That's a proposal that's being discussed by the Association of ONC Counties. In the last year, we had to answer a question from one of our congressionals about what would it cost to move the BLM lands into the Forest Service management scheme. So there's been thoughts about getting rid of the BLM, or getting rid of the BLM's forestry program and putting it over to the Forest Service. That doesn't deal with the legal aspect, the historical legal aspect that George McFadden talked about. Congressman DeFazio, Congressman Schrader are also floating proposals about putting the 2.6 million acres of ONC land up for a long-term lease with trustee responsibilities going to a private corporation. And the dollars coming from that lease going to help the counties. So unlike Jerry, I don't feel like we have time with the BLM. We have a lot of focus on us right now. Litigation, political, economic. It's coming from all sides. And I want to be optimistic and think of, to use that old cliche about the perfect storm. It's a perfect storm for getting, I hope, the community together to talk about what is the future of the ONC lands. I didn't hear any magic solutions over the last 2 days. I'm not going to leave here with my silver bullet, but I did hear some pretty interesting things, and I want to touch on just a few of those. And I want to do it with, before I start that, I need to put out a caveat. We all listen with our own biases. So if I misinterpreted or misheard something because I'm going to mention a few names here, I'd like to know about it, because that's not my intent, but we all listen with our own filters. So we heard Robert Ryby, and I'll also apologize if I butcher names, but we heard Robert Ryby talk about social acceptability and the power of green tree retention. And I think that's a powerful tool that BLM could look at as we think about what our future may be. And it's got the potential to address more than social acceptability. We heard Dee Olson talk about connectivity across headwater streams. So we got some potential there. And we heard Daniel Miller talking about planning for landslides. So we could put some of our retention into those kinds of thoughts. Good areas where it makes sense to retain trees for other than just the social acceptability. It can do more than one thing. We heard a couple speakers talk about the human element of density management. We heard John Tappener talk about how important experience of loggers are and how important the infrastructure is. We all know that we can't manage our forests, we can't do restoration or commodity production without a skilled workforce. We have to keep those folks in mind. We also heard Lauren Kellogg talk about the importance of having skilled workers skilled loggers who know how to do this thinning to get the most beneficial product. So there's that part of the social, economic, human element as well. We heard a couple speakers talk about planning for a full array of habitats across the landscape, and Jerry mentioned that as well. Mike Newton and Robert Dendry talked about those topics. As an aside, we didn't hear it here. Well, we heard a little bit about elk, but we've had presentations from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Service and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation outside of the context of this discussion about their concern for the lack of early seral on federal land. So private industry is really, as you folks know, really good at getting a closed canopy management when they do their clear cutting, their regeneration harvest. And I think some of Tom Spee's work has showed that if we stay on the Northwest Forest Plan, we're going to have a real paucity of early seral stage. And that's the way it's playing out as we implement the Northwest Forest Plan, because we've had so much focus on thinning. So there's unintended consequences. And Gordy Reeves, mentioned you can't have everything on every acre. So once again, planning for diversity of habitats across the landscape. Robert Papps talked about managing for old growth and how it's a moving target. We have to be flexible. Right now we're living, we, the Forest Service and the BLM, we're living with different old growth management or late successional forest management than was envisioned in the Northwest Forest Plan as a result of the new Spotted Owl Recovery Plan. And that's going to be built upon with the new critical habitat for northern spotted owl that's coming out, probably draft within the next few months. So we have to be adaptable. Things are changing, and that's a real challenge for the federal agencies. We heard a lot about balance and trade-offs. Jerry mentioned in his closing remarks, we heard Mark Harmon talk about thinning doesn't, it reduces carbon storage. We heard Dave Marshall say thinning doesn't give you bonus wood. Then we heard Julia Burton talk about increasing species richness for thinning. And we heard about how thinning can reduce fire intensity and how it provides for economic activity. So there's trade-offs. There's no one answer here. And today we heard a lot about riparian management. And Dee Dee Olson in her talk talked about, density management. Density management was set up to look at some of what we were talking about, some of the management direction that was set forth in the Northwest Forest Plan. So we're going to do it. Let's take a hard look at it. So just a few things I wanted to mention that I picked up on today. I found to talk about the intrinsic potential, pretty interesting, and I wondered how it plays against the priority watersheds that we have identified in the Northwest Forest Plan. If that new information about intrinsic potential would cause us to rethink things differently. We heard about stream orientation and topography are important for stream shading versus a one-size-fits-all approach. I added that last part, the one-size-fits-all approach. But the Northwest Forest Plan right now has it didn't take that kind of stuff into consideration. I'll just leave it at that. And then Gordy Reeves, I'll refer to him again. Should our riparian goal really be old growth everywhere? We need greater latitude to implement activities. That's what I heard from Gordy. We heard Bob Dannelry mention that thinning can increase stream productivity. Do we have to have riparian reserves that you can't touch them? We heard Peter Bisson talk about federal bureaucracy prevented experimentation in areas that were designed for experimentation. So the challenge, how do we apply adaptive management when we have all this bureaucracy in the way? And we heard Gordy Reeves when he said, I'm not going to talk about landscape analysis. What I heard him say was the challenges, there's challenges around using what are currently the codified federal processes. So a challenge, how do we do adaptive management? How do we build that into our plans? How does BLM take that into its future? I already mentioned the green tree retention example where we could get some connectivity over headwater streams. We can get multiple benefits from practices. We don't have to have this practice here, this practice there. We have to look at how we collectively, the collective benefits we get from the activities we put on the landscape. It can't be cumulative, and that's what it feels like to me. So right now, once again, Mike Caskey's perspective, we have the Northwest Forest Plan, then we have new spot owl recovery, then we have new critical habitat, and it's all just cumulative, cumulative, cumulative. At the same point, from the political and social end, we're saying, give us more jobs, give us more jobs. One person even asked us, actually came out of Washington, D.C., it might have been the Office of Management and Budget, as they're talking about looking for funding, potential funding for the Secure Rural Schools reauthorization. They said, can't you guys cut more timber to fund Secure Rural Schools? We're going, duh. What do you think Secure Rural Schools was all about? If we're going to just keep piling on, where does that put us? So I think that's something that needs to be in a dialogue. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the challenge of communication. And a couple examples here today, one personal and one that we witnessed. The little interchange between Doug Hyken and Gordy Reeves about the old growth riparian thing. Those kinds of discussions are really important. And then for me, I was up looking at one of the posters, and then once again, I was making fun of myself with my new eyeballs. And I said, can somebody interpret this thing for me? Because I can't really see it because it's really complicated. And Liz Cole came up and she said, yeah, I can do that. And she gave me, in a minute and a half or less, a really clear understanding of what all those complicated graphs were. We saw a lot of that up here today, a lot of scientific stuff, but the public doesn't understand that stuff, and I don't think they have the patience to go through it. So we have a communications challenge. So I think about what I heard here, and I'm putting it in a bigger context than just what's BLM going to do with thinning. I think those examples I brought up of things we did here show that there is room for, the need for, in my opinion, dialogue about what we're doing on the landscape. What unintended consequences are we having? What's being successful and what's not being successful? It has to be informed by science, but ultimately it's a social, it's a political, it's an economic, and a scientific discussion. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic, unfortunately, because, once again, the BLM is facing some real challenges. The status quo for us, we can't go on the way it is. We have to do something different. So I think what we heard here will help frame some of that dialogue, and for that, I'm very thankful. And I am optimistic. When I did my opening remarks, Jeff Lockwood from NOAA asked me, what's BLM doing next with this collaborative inquiry? I explained we were thinking about maybe trying to convene a regional collaborative dialogue. I think some of the stuff that we heard today would be really powerful information to bring forward and hopefully find a solution that helps our communities, that helps our forests, that helps our wildlife, that helps our fish. And I'm done. Klaus, you don't have to give me the hook. So I'll take some questions if anybody has any.